The air at the stadium buzzed with excitement. The sound of families cheering blending into a constant warm roar. Warm for everyone else, at least. I sat among a sea of graduating students in identical caps and gowns, but my eyes kept drifting to the stands. Every few seconds I craned my neck, searching for even one familiar face. My mother had promised she'd be here. Not enthusiastically, not proudly, but she'd said she'd come. My sister didn't bother promising, but even she had texted earlier in the week that she might show up if she wasn't too tired. It wasn't much, but I clung to it. I'd clung to scraps of their attention my whole life. The ceremony began with the usual speeches. Too long, too self-congratulatory, but I barely heard a word. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, drowning out everything else. Each time a family whooped loudly for their graduate, my stomach tightened. I kept telling myself not to get emotional, not to let disappointment creep in so early. Maybe they were stuck in traffic. Maybe parking was a nightmare. Maybe, just maybe, I'd look up in a few minutes and see Mom waving with that tight smile she always wore when she wanted people to think she was supportive. When the first row of students stood, the applause was deafening. I scanned the crowd again. Nothing. Second row. Nothing. My row. My legs felt heavy as I rose with everyone else. My hands were trembling, so I clasped them together. As we moved toward the stage, the realization dug deeper. I was walking alone, surrounded by hundreds of people, and yet I'd never felt more invisible. I watched as others stepped onto the stage and heard their names ring out, followed by cheers, actual joy pouring from their families. A father whistled so loudly the people around him laughed. A mother cried openly, waving her phone in the air to record the moment. My throat tightened painfully. I kept staring up at the stands, squinting, searching, hoping. When my name echoed through the speakers, I paused for half a breath. It sounded strange, hollow, like an announcement made into an empty room. I stepped forward. No cheers followed. Not a single clap from the section where my family was supposed to be. Only the generic applause that washed over every graduate by default. I shook the dean's hand with a smile that felt stapled onto my face, and walked across the stage with my heart sinking lower with each step. Returning to my seat, the truth settled heavily onto my shoulders. They weren't coming. They never planned to come. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I forced them back. No one else needed to know the humiliation blooming inside me. I straightened my spine and stared forward, pretending I was fine, pretending I wasn't hollowed out by a disappointment I should have expected. The ceremony dragged on. I clapped mechanically when others took pictures, hugged, celebrated. Once it ended, graduates flooded the field, families swarming them with flowers, balloons, gifts. I watched a girl collapse into her mother's arms, sobbing happily. A herd of siblings hoisted their brother onto their shoulders. Someone's grandparents were kissing a graduate's cheeks while holding a giant handmade sign. I walked alone through the chaos toward the parking lot, avoiding eye contact with anyone who looked like they were about to ask, "Where's your family?" My phone buzzed. My heart stupidly leapt. Maybe they were late? Maybe they were here now. But the notification wasn't a call, not even a message from Mom. It was a spam email. I sat in my car and finally let my head fall back against the seat. A single, shaky breath escaped me. And then another. And then the tears came. Quiet, exhausted, bitter. I'd done everything I was supposed to do. I'd worked myself into the ground to pay bills they should have helped with. I'd missed holidays, birthdays, nights out, all to make it to this finish line. And they didn't even bother showing up. I stared at my phone, waiting, hoping, wishing. But hours passed with nothing. Not a call. Not a text. Not even a careless congrats. The empty seats at graduation became more than a moment. They became the truth I had been refusing to see my whole life. I didn't have a family. I had people who relied on me when they needed. 3 days passed after graduation, each one quieter than the last. I kept my phone nearby at all times, though I never admitted to myself why. Maybe I thought Mom would eventually pretend to care, send a half-hearted "how was it?" or a guilt-tinged "sorry we couldn't make it." I would have even taken a lazy thumbs-up emoji, anything that showed I was more than a walking bank account to her. But my phone stayed silent, screen dark, notifications non-existent. The first day, I was angry. The second day, I tried to convince myself I didn't need them. By the third, something inside me had settled into a dull, tired ache. I cooked dinner for one, watched a show I wasn't really paying attention to, and tried to fall asleep early. But my mind kept replaying the empty stadium seats. I wondered what lie my family told themselves to justify it. He'll understand. It's not a big deal. We were busy. Maybe they didn't justify anything at all. Maybe they simply didn't think about me. That was the part that hurt most. On the fourth morning, as I was making coffee, my phone buzzed on the counter. I froze. For a second my heart stupidly lifted, like muscle memory trying to hope again. I wiped my hands and reached for the phone, telling myself to be calm, telling myself not to expect anything. The message was from Mom. Finally. For a fleeting moment, relief washed over me. But it evaporated as soon as I opened the text. Mom. Need $2,100 for your sister's Sweet 16. Send today. We booked the venue. I stared at the screen as if the message might rearrange itself into something reasonable. Something human. But no, those were the exact words. No greeting. No apology. Not one sentence acknowledging the most important day of my life. Just a demand. Not a request. A demand. My stomach tightened as a familiar heat rose in my chest. I could almost hear her voice behind the text, sharp, impatient, entitled. I read it again. Then again. The numbers glared up at me. 2,100. Like it was nothing. Like she hadn't ignored me for days. Like she hadn't skipped my graduation without explanation. Of course the first time she reached out was because she needed money. Of course. I didn't reply. Not at first. I walked around the kitchen with the phone still in my hand, trying to process the cocktail of emotions hitting me. Hurt, humiliation, anger, clarity. I leaned against the counter and let the truth settle. This was who my family was. This was who they had always been. I had been too hopeful, too forgiving, too desperate for connection to see it clearly. My mind drifted to every time I paid one of their bills, every emergency loan that was never repaid, every guilt trip that started with family helps family. Except I was the only one doing any helping. And the help they gave in return wasn't love. It was the bare minimum acknowledgement necessary to keep me useful. But this time was different. This time I wasn't a broke 19-year-old trying to keep the peace. I wasn't the exhausted student juggling jobs. I wasn't a scared kid waiting for approval. I was done. My thumb hovered over the keypad. I felt strangely calm. As if my mind had been waiting for this exact moment to wake up. I opened my banking app. Typed $1. One single dollar. I hit send. Under the memo line I wrote, "Congrats." Just that. Cold. Minimal. Final. I stared at it for a long moment before pressing send. When I did, a wave of relief washed over me. Light, clean, and strangely powerful. I didn't owe them emotional explanations anymore. I didn't owe them money. I didn't owe them anything. The reaction was immediate. Buzz. 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 Mom. Is this supposed to be funny? Send the rest. Now. Don't be ungrateful after everything I've done for you. My sister piled on next. Sister. Wow. Ruining my birthday? Loser behavior. I read all of it in silence. Each message felt less like a wound and more like confirmation. Proof of everything I had been afraid to admit. I didn't reply. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. Instead, I walked to the front door, stared at the knob for a moment, then grabbed my keys. If I was done, then I needed to be done. Not halfway. Not partially. Completely. 20 minutes later, I was at the hardware store buying a new lock, a thick, heavy deadbolt that no one but me would have a key to. As I installed it, the final screw tightening into place, something inside me settled with it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't their safety net. I wasn't their wallet. I wasn't their second thought. I was free. The new lock clicked into place with a satisfying solidity, a quiet sound but powerful enough to echo through every memory of being walked over, dismissed, or used. I ran my hand over the cold metal, feeling an unfamiliar sense of control settle into my chest. For once, the boundary was physical, unmistakable, and entirely mine. No one was getting in without my permission. No one was entitled to my space anymore. That night, I sat on the couch with a simple bowl of pasta and put on the kind of TV show I never usually watched. One with warm lighting, slow dialogue, nothing stressful. The silence in the house felt different. It wasn't the kind that pressed on you or reminded you of everything you lacked. It was a peaceful silence, the kind you could breathe in. I didn't expect the peace to last. And it didn't. The next afternoon, I was sorting laundry when I heard the first pounding on the front door. Not knocking, slamming. Someone was hitting the wood hard enough to rattle it. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze for a moment before walking toward the door. Through the peephole, I saw my mother on the porch, hands balled into fists, jaw clenched, face stiff with rage. My sister was behind her, pacing back and forth like she was preparing to storm the door. "Open this door, Alex," Mom shouted, pounding again. "I know you're in there." Of course she would come unannounced. Of course she would act like she had every right to enter. In her mind, my house was still hers. Her convenience, her fallback, her resource. She didn't knock. She demanded. I didn't open the door. Something in me refused to even speak through it. She kept hammering at the wood, her voice rising with every attempt. "What is wrong with you? You think this is cute? You think being petty makes you better than us?" I leaned my forehead against the door, closing my eyes. My heartbeat wasn't frantic like it once would have been. It was steady, controlled. For the first time, her anger didn't make me shrink. It made me tired. Then my sister jumped in, her voice sharp and mocking. "You seriously locked us out? You're such a freak, Alex. Mom said you changed the lock. Who does that to their own family?" Family. The word tasted bitter. They kept yelling, trying to force guilt into me like it was a key to the lock. But guilt didn't work anymore. Not after graduation. Not after the message they sent. Not after a lifetime of treating me like an asset rather than a person. I walked away from the door and sat on the stairs, listening to the muffled chaos. Their voices rose, then fell, then rose again. At one point, Mom banged so loudly she yelled "my hand" and cursed for 30 seconds straight. Eventually, the banging stopped. I peeked through the peephole again. They were still outside, now sitting on the porch steps. My sister kept scrolling on her phone while Mom talked rapidly, angrily, gesturing toward the house every few seconds. Watching them through the door, separated from me by just a few inches of wood and a new lock, a flood of old memories trickled in. The time Mom blamed me for the electric bill being late, even though I was the one who'd paid it. The time my sister called me cheap because I couldn't afford to buy her a designer jacket while I was working nights just to buy textbooks. The birthdays I missed because I was working double shifts, and the ones they forgot of mine without any excuse. Every "can you send money?" Every "you owe us." Every "stop being dramatic." It all mixed together, a mosaic of moments I had tried so hard to overlook. This wasn't new behavior. It was the pattern finally becoming impossible to ignore. After another half hour, Mom stood abruptly and shouted through the door one last time. "We'll be back. You can't keep doing this to us. You are part of this family whether you like it or not." Her words hung in the air long after they walked down the driveway. But they weren't true, not anymore. I waited until their car finally pulled away before stepping outside. The porch was quiet, still echoing with the ghost of their anger. I locked the deadbolt behind me again, listening to the click that now sounded like a promise. For years, they came and went from my life as if they were entitled to every corner of it. But standing on that porch, breathing in the knock on the door the next morning was different, sharper, more controlled. Not the impatient pounding of someone demanding entry, but the firm, authoritative rhythm of someone who expected to be taken seriously. I had barely slept. After my mother's meltdown on the porch, I kept imagining her coming back with new schemes, new ways to guilt me, new attempts to claw her way back into my home. But I wasn't prepared for the sight of two uniformed police officers standing on my doorstep. For a moment, I simply froze. The breath lodged in my throat, and my stomach dropped in a sick wave of disbelief. This had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe they were canvassing the neighborhood. Maybe a car on the street had been broken into. But the way they stood, calm, patient, facing my door directly, told me otherwise. "Are you Alex Roberts?" the older officer asked when I finally cracked the door open. "Yes." My voice sounded smaller than I intended, but steady enough. "We received a report from your mother," he continued. "She stated that you've locked her out of the home and are refusing to return her belongings." Of course she had done this. A bitter laugh almost escaped my lips, but I swallowed it back. "She doesn't live here," I said evenly. "This is my home. I pay for everything. She doesn't have belongings here except things she dumped on me years ago." The younger officer glanced behind me into the house, then at the secure deadbolt. "Could we step inside for a moment to ask a few questions?" "Sure." I opened the door fully and let them enter. My hands visible, my demeanor calm. I had nothing to hide. They stood in the living room, scanning the space, not suspiciously, but observationally. I could tell this wasn't their first time dealing with a family dispute blown out of proportion by someone who believed entitlement was a legal right. "Can you show us proof of residency?" the older officer asked politely. I walked to the small drawer in the entryway and pulled out the lease, still crisp from when I'd filed it away. My name, my signature, my payments, everything was in order. I handed it to him. He scanned it, nodding. "Thank you." The younger officer asked, "Do you mind explaining your side of the situation?" I took a slow breath. My mother and sister didn't show up to my graduation last week. No call, no apology. 3 days later, the first message I get is her demanding $2,100 for my sister's Sweet 16. When I didn't send it, they came here yesterday and tried to force their way in. I changed the locks because they think they can walk in whenever they want. They don't live here. And this morning, I guess she decided to retaliate by calling you. Both officers exchanged a look. A knowing look. A tired, familiar look. "Do you have the messages?" the older one asked. I opened my phone and handed it to him. The demand for money. The angry barrage after I sent $1. The insults. He scrolled quietly. His eyebrows lifted slightly at the more aggressive parts. Then he passed it to the younger officer, who read through with the same resigned expression. When they handed the phone back, the older officer adjusted his belt and said, "All right. Here's the situation, Alex. You're the legal resident. No one has the right to enter without your consent. Changing the locks is within your rights." The younger officer added, "And based on the messages, it looks like your mother is trying to pressure you financially. This is not a criminal matter on your part." Some tension I hadn't even realized I was holding finally melted from my shoulders. "Though, I'm not in trouble." "Not at all," he said with a reassuring nod. "We just needed to confirm the facts." A wave of relief washed through me so strong my knees almost weakened. I thanked them quietly. "We'll go speak with your mother," the older officer said. "You don't have to join us. In fact, it may be better if you stay inside."